Welcome to the Exec Exchange, 15-minute podcast in which a leader from the water sector shares a story to inspire, inform, and educate other water sector leaders from around the globe. My name is Piers Clark, and on today's Exec Exchange, it's a special World Water Day podcast where we're talking to not one, but two water sector leaders, Tanya Huizer and Vivek Rahman, both from the Asian Development Bank. And we're going to be talking about some recent work that the ADB's done to rank 50 nations on how their water assets and water behaviors have been performing. Vivek, Tanya, it's wonderful to have you with us today.
Hi, Piers. It's a pleasure to be here a second time. So thank you again.
Thank you, Piers. It's great to join for the first time.
Excellent. Well, we always start with a little bit about our podcasters. So, Tanya, let's start with you. Can you give me the potted history of who you are and how you got into the role that you're in today?
I'm passionate about working with people, communities, and that's also how I ended up in the role where I am now. I started as a rebel activist to fight for my own community in my hometown in the Netherlands. Currently, I'm working as a senior water resilience specialist, and I focus on professionals, fresh ideas, and see how we can make change. So social inclusion and communities are the core of my work in water management, besides other exciting things that I do, like working on the Asian Water Development Outlook and managing a water resilience trust fund.
When did you start working with the Asian Development Bank?
It's about 2.5 years ago. Before that, I was working for an engineering firm in Myanmar and Vietnam.
Brilliant. And now, Vivek, we have actually had a podcast with you before, but can I have the same from you, your potted history as to how you got into the role you're in today?
My history is a little bit different from Tanya's. I grew up with no real passion for the water sector or any of that. I mean, I came from a comfortable background in India, very privileged in some ways. Then suddenly when I studied economics and got a job at the World Bank around 15, 20 years ago, and I was put into urban sanitation, that was my first introduction to this sector. It changed my life and I haven't looked back since. And I've been with ADB for around 8 years. I'm deeply committed to this sector. And the best part of working in an organization like ADB is to work with wonderful people like Tanya to actually see how we can drive change in this sector. And this report, I hope, will be a key step to that.
Well, we're going to get to that report in a second, but I'm going to come back to Tanya now, just in case there's anyone in the audience who's not familiar with what the Asian Development Bank is and does. Could you give us that summary?
Asian Development Bank is a multilateral development bank. We're working in all developing member countries across Asia and Pacific, aiming to reduce poverty and improving quality of life. So of course, we provide technical assistance to governments and agencies. The bank provides financing and where to invest in terms of infrastructure, but also beyond that. We provide policy advice. That's also where the report we will talk about comes in, actually, for policy dialogues. In the end, we really want to support the inclusive economic growth, climate resilience, and sustainable development in the countries that we work.
Excellent. I love how the IFIs, the international finance institutions like the ADB, it's not just about putting money, it's about improving the lives of nations and impacting millions of people. It's a glorious organization to be part of. Now, Vivek, last Sunday was World Water Day. This is a special podcast because we want to focus on some of the international things that are going on around water. And Asian Development Bank sits across many nations. So can you introduce this recent piece of work that you've done and give us the high level of why you did it and what it showed?
The Asian Development Bank prepares this key flagship report called the Asian Water Development Outlook. This comes around every 5 years or so. So we are running its 5th edition now. We assess water security writ large by looking at 5 key dimensions of all nations and economies in Asia and the Pacific. And these 5 key dimensions are, number 1, rural household water security and urban water household security, for KD3 as we call it. This is basically to look at the amount of water you have for your drinking purposes. Then you've got key dimension 2, which is economic water security, which is looking at, do farmers have water to irrigate their crops? And then the general economy and how much water the economy needs, along with the industries that depend on economies on water. KD4, simply put, is how is the environment doing? What's the health of the rivers and the lakes and all of the ecosystem that depends on that? And lastly, we look at how strong is a nation ready to respond to three types of water-related disasters: floods, storms, and droughts. That's basically how we look at it. And holistically, we give all nations a score of out of 100, and each key dimension has a score of around 20. We were very lucky to have 5 key different partners to help us do this analysis and come up with robust conclusions.
Excellent. So, Tanya, who are the audience and what are you hoping would be the impact of this report?
I think the purpose of the report is to make water security more visible. And so it's impossible to ignore where we need to focus on. That's why decision makers are actually the core audience to work with. We want to help them to shape their policies, to prioritize certain investment based on the progress they're making or actually they're lacking to make. Besides decision makers and governments, of course, also communities, cities, technical partners who are interested to use the report in their own analysis, that is definitely encouraged. And to be honest, I think the method is so strong and also so useful for other regions. I think that is definitely an audience that we also want to reach.
The moment you know there's a score, then there's a table and someone's at the top of the table and someone's at the bottom of the table. And does that mean the people at the top of the table go, well, I don't need to do anything else. I'm at the top of the table. I can stop investing in water. Or is it that because you've got these 5 different metrics, people will see that they're performing well in one and less well in another, and that they can learn from the people who are performing better? Knowing how the ADB works, I assume this is very collaborative and it's about showcasing best case examples and helping those who are not performing well to climb their way up the table.
We knew you would ask that question, and that is why we've got a great answer for that. First and foremost is we want to say to all the listeners out there, and particularly to government practitioners, the idea of this tool is to help you improve. So you're in competition with yourself. We can benchmark you from the last decade. So this report looks at how you did since 2013. Because as you know, in this sector, you can't just look at every 5 years, right? So we went all the way back to 2013 to see what's the narrative that comes up and how countries have done. Resist the temptation to compare yourself with your neighbors. Number 2 is that you're only as strong as your weakest dimension. So if you may have done great in 4 out of the 5 dimensions, but if one dimension is not doing well, your overall score is going to reflect that weakest dimension. So that doesn't mean that you just sit back and just relax, because we want to help countries to be able to improve their water security to reach a stage which is at the top of the water security steps.
From that, I guess that means you're not going to tell me who's at the top of the table and who's at the bottom of the table. You're going to refuse to give me that information. But I would like you to highlight some best practice and some areas which are needing more effort, needing more focus. Tanya, can you do that for me?
I'm happy to share the positive news that the entire region, Asia and the Pacific, has made real progress in water security. Billions of people are better off than a decade ago, but there is still a lot to do. And the climate change is, of course, increasingly playing a role in that. It makes it very clear that water security is more than pipes and pumps. It's about people, it's about the ecosystems and economies and institutions, inclusion, voices of people. I think the report is very clearly showing that infrastructure alone is not enough.
That feels like an evolution. In 2013, we probably weren't thinking so much about those softer elements. It was pour some concrete, build an asset here, that's what will solve this. Am I right?
You know what really surprised me when we were doing this analysis and trying to interpret what this data says to us is a story of remarkable contrast. On one hand, you had 2.7 billion people lifted out of basic water insecurity. That means across all the 5 dimensions, they either had more better quality drinking water or a little bit more water to irrigate their farms or some sort of resilience from floods, storms, and drought. On the other hand, you've got 3 critical risks threatening this progress. Number 1 is you've got disasters that are coming faster in this region than the country's ability to prepare for it. Number 2, you've got an investment shortfall. You need around $250 billion a year to meet just your wash needs. And that gap is around $150 billion is required by each country. The third one, and which is where it's interesting, is 30 out of the 50 economies saw their environmental health score either stay stagnant or decline. It basically means that we built a lot of infrastructure, but at the cost of the environment. So if in 2013, the biggest problem for this region was rural sanitation, thanks to a lot of efforts and policies and infrastructure that's been built, big number of people have been lifted out of that. But today, the biggest problem remains key dimension 4, which is environmental health, is at incredible risk.
The point that's made by Vivek is key, and we see it also in all the projects that we're developing in the region. I think the fact that we still use hard infrastructure instead of hybrid or nature-based solutions, that all plays a role with that. But we also see the shift in mindset of people trying to include not only nature-based solutions, but also in the planning phase already allocate space, allocate attention to restoring ecosystems. And one of the examples I want to touch on is the recent initiative of ADB on the laundry transformation in river systems and drainage systems. The laundry transformation focuses on river health in terms of pollution from microfibers. By doing laundry by hand, a lot of microfibers from clothes come into the systems, as well as detergents that are not restricted in many countries. So there's a win to achieve as well. I think in general, the ADWDO report is a great achievement in terms of information, but also in terms of what it means for the people and how people can play a role.
And do you sense that the audience, the decision makers you're sending this report to, are open to hearing this constructive criticism, this pathway to improving? Or are you concerned that this message is not going to be listened to?
Actually, I don't view it as any criticism at all. What we are able to demonstrate is that countries actually focus on where their needs are. You can see success in just a decade. You guys have done well, but on the other side, you've got a little bit more to do. And here we are to help you make that journey. If you look at India alone, I think they pushed somewhere around 840 million people with some kind of sanitation and water project, which was a nationwide campaign that they've been running for over a decade. That is a huge number. So these big numbers of 2.7 billion people comes predominantly from countries like India, who are showing that success can be achieved at scale, but it requires a whole bunch of things to work together. Political will, leadership, the right governance, the right investments to go where people need it the most.
Brilliant. Tanya, I know that you've reached out to a broad section of the communities you interface with to gather the data for this report. Can you talk to me a bit about who those communities are?
We gathered actually about 50 people from all over the region, guided by 5 young authors. All of them were under 35, to draft text boxes for each of the key dimensions in the report. The text boxes were not just their opinions, they were really success stories of involving youth or letting youth lead certain initiatives related to water security.
It's getting that next generation, because they're the ones who are going to sort out the climate crisis. This is the generation that's got to get their arms around it and resolve it. Now, we can't complete this without name checking, in particular those who are doing well, but also maybe those who could do better. Could you give us some of that, please?
Let's look at the top performers. Number 1 is the People's Republic of China. Millions of people being lifted out for rural household water security. Number 2, you had Laos, PDR, with some strong investments in hydropower, irrigation, and good governance. You had another country in Southeast Asia, which is Cambodia. Again, strong government commitments, improvements in tariff. India, I already mentioned. Then you've got countries like Uzbekistan, which also did well because of sustained improvements in investments, coordination, and successes in economic water security. And for all of you who are interested in more details, just search AWDO 2025, and there's a website where you can download country scorecards as well.
Asian Water Development Outlook 2025. Brilliant. Now, we're running out of time, and we like to finish with a bit of an insightful question from our podcasters. So, Tanya, I'm going to come to you and ask you to go back in time, 20, 30 years, and tell me, what advice would you give your younger self if you could go back?
I've been thinking about that, Piers, and what I think is the most important advice is to invest in other people and in relationships with people, because we can only improve and change the things around by working together. Change only happens through people.
Brilliant. And Vivek, you've already been on the podcast once, so you get a different question. The question for you is, when did you last cry? And most importantly, why?
For all my friends and family listening know that I'm a very big crier. As you can imagine, the AWDO was almost a year-long effort to put together. We had some great highs and there were things that went wrong. At one particular moment, very close to the launch of the report, something went awry. And I had a good cry in this office. I just put my head down, said, I need to try this out, and then I'm going to fight again. And I had a good 10-minute cry and got back to work.
You have been listening to the Exec Exchange with me, Piers Clark, and my guests today have been Tanya Huizer and Vivek Raman from the Asian Development Bank. And we've been talking about the Asian Water Development Outlook Report. Thank you to our sponsors. And until next time, keep asking questions, keep sharing, and keep safe.